talk for a moment about the role each of you plays in the makeup of the section. Um, Maybe I'd like for each of you just to give us a feel for what you feel your role and responsibility is to the section, and then also maybe what you look for from the other members of the section. I know Jim and Steve, you guys have played all three chairs, and I'd like you to maybe address that as well. But Toby, why don't we start with you? You're the principal player. What do you maybe talk about those factors?
Well, I think the best way I can answer that is to say the experience that I gained just observing my colleagues, effective and not so effective, as I came up through different orchestras, and I found that the brilliant players seem to celebrate the brilliant people around them. I mean, they, in addition to being fantastically gifted on their instruments, they were acutely aware of the intelligence and the gifts brought by other colleagues, and I am truly surrounded by brilliant people. So the experience of the gentleman on my right, it would be foolish of me to not make room for that or even celebrate that in every possible opportunity. But the truth of the matter is, in all the brass, I am surrounded by brilliant people. And I consider my job to sort of match Tom and Jamie as best I can. And then
who were the just for
sorry,
our viewers
Tom Rolfe's principal trumpet
Mm-hmm.
and Jamie Somerville, principal horn.
Okay.
In every ensemble situation, that would be everything from pitch, rhythm, and dynamics, especially to try to make sure that we're all on the same page. But then oftentimes that won't agree with the trombone section, notwithstanding the tuba as well. And so there's a constant dialogue that has only been a problem if we stop talking. If people just assume that everything is great, it's like we have a great week and then the next week it's not so great, and then we have to start talking again. And we sort of combine intelligence, and when I say that sort of suggests that we're always in constant agreement. That's very much not the case. And it becomes a discussion, and sometimes we don't have time to discuss, and then we just do our best to keep the hierarchy of melody intact. Or typically, if the top voice is leading, such that if Jamie has the melody, we need to do everything we can to facilitate his phrase goals and dynamic range. Likewise, if Tom is also leading, and there just isn't time for the discussion, we just go with Tom. But if there is opportunity for discussion, I think oftentimes we're all working hard to communicate with each other, and that might be one of the gifts of youth, or it might be one of the best gifts of being surrounded by intelligent people, is that they're really eager to share the responsibility of keeping it at such a very high level. And when anybody tries to do that all on their own, it becomes very problematic, and that dialogue disappears, and going to work isn't very fun. So
I think what Toby's talking about in simplistic terms is just one big team. And so that's the way I like to think of it, because when I was, like I said before, I was a sports guy, and I was on the baseball team, and so a lot of times I'd play right field and I wouldn't get the ball for 6 innings, and the ball would come. Oh, everyone's reliant on me now to make the play. And that's kind of how we function as a section, because we're not really that important every time we pick up our instrument. Sometimes when we pick up our instrument, it's really important. Sometimes it's really soft, like in the Wagner's, Liebestod. Or sometimes we have to know what our role is, what our function is. And within the section, we all have our roles too. And I think Jim and I could both talk about playing all the different roles within the section. First trombone, second trombone, I've even played some bass trombone. And doing that has really opened my eyes to see that, yeah, there are certain challenges. You see chords built in such a way that it doesn't happen very often where the third of the core is in the bass trombone, but when it does, you really need to know that that's what's going on. You know, because you really need to know.
Indeed.
So yeah, so things like that, or you also really need to know that the air just comes out of the bass trombone a lot quicker. So we have to as the first trombone, second trombone, you know, checking, okay, can we breathe here, or can we make this phrase? How do you feel about this? Should we have a group breath, or should we stagger our breathing? And so we're always mindful of what the other part is doing, and that's the great thing about this section is we've all done this now. We've all played all the parts. I mean, maybe no bass trombone for you, but okay, well that's okay. But that's just been one of the really neat things. As a second player, I love playing second. Sometimes, you know, a lot of people think of it as an unheralded position, but I think I happen to love it very much because I'm part of the team and try to make the section sound great with great pitch, good sound, and but there just every once in a while something will get thrown my way where I get to put on the principal hat and Scheherazade, tuba mira, where it's just me, and I relish those opportunities. Or sometimes, and a lot of times, actually probably more times than not, more times than putting the principal hat on, I get to put on the bass trombone hat, and I love that. So I like being kind of a chameleon, go either way, from first to bass to just second, and I just love it. It's really a lot of fun to sit next to these two guys.
Yeah, Jim, how about?
Well, I mean, it's as Steve started on. You know, every member of the section has their role and has their responsibility, and I've got a meaningful and very real responsibility to contribute. And my contributions might come in the way of when, as Toby said, we were discussing things. There might things that I have to say, and I can feel very free to say them. Yeah. At the same time, it's also my job to respect the leadership. And when all is said and done, somebody has to make a decision, especially if we don't necessarily completely agree on how to do something or not. It's my job to respect the principal's authority. And you know, whether in New York with Joe or whether I was assisting and sitting first when I was in New York, and David and Don would do the same thing. They would say, you know, how do you want to do this? Or I could look down and say, you know, I think maybe we can try not breathing there. And we might have discussion, but ultimately somebody has to make the decision in order for the section to work well. Mm-hmm. And Steve's and my job is to contribute for Toby's decision making, but ultimately, if the buck has to stop somewhere, and so it's our job to enable Toby to do that to the best of his ability. The cool thing about the bass trombone chair is that most oftentimes I'm the lowest voice of the trombones, but sometimes I'm the middle voice, you know, the second lowest voice of the hollow brass. Sometimes the tuba and I are in a unit, and so my job is to understand where exactly my role is. Am I with the trombones? Am I with the tuba? Are we all part of one big thing, and what needs to come out and what doesn't? And it changes. You know, if I've got to play something with Mike Roylance, our principal tuba, you know, maybe I'll put a little bit more guts in the sound, or a little bit more zip in the sound, just to work within his. Whereas if we're doing something with a section, I'll try to either warm it out or make sure not to be too much, so I'm supportive, while allowing Toby's voice on the top to sit on top of that I'm having to push. So it's a really cool function, this particular position. But they all have jobs and they all have responsibilities. I mean, Steve's position, whenever I've played second, it's always been, hey, you got to be the meat in the sandwich. You know, you don't want to be you don't want to have two thick slices of bread and one little slice of bologna in there. You know, you got to have enough meat to match what you got on the other side.
Well, and the great thing is we talk about this. It's a constant communication about balance, pitch. You hear enough of me? I mean, and so you have to throw the ego out the door and just say, hey, you know, are we balanced here? Are we not? Let me know. You know, and so luckily we've got that here, and that's the great thing about this section.
Yeah, it strikes me, even when you guys were talking about the hall, one of the qualities that kind of underlies everything is that you listen. You guys clearly have immense talent levels and abilities, but if you're not listening all the time, and I think it transcends genres of music. I mean, where I live in the commercial and jazz world, you have to listen,
Yeah.
you know, and you have to react. And
Yeah.
good point that you're making, Jim, is that, you know, somebody has to be the buck has to stop somewhere in terms of articulation, dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. But by the same token, I can tell just by the way all three of you are, that's part of the huge success you're having, is that you clearly all listen. And that, I think, is, for our viewers, I think it's a really important thing for young players to understand that even when you get to this elite level, it's constant listening and constant, you know, kind of musical flexibility. You know, we all do, but you three have an important connection and relationship with the great Joe Alessi. I was fortunate to interview Joe a couple months back for this series, for the Bone2Pick series, and he was as inspiring as ever. I mean, he's as fired up as he was when I first talked to him 30 years ago when he was at Curtis, and we had a great time seeing him and talking with him, and we had a good, really enjoyable afternoon. At any rate, I know all three of you have a connection with him, and if you could share one quick memory or one quick thought, or one of your favorite thoughts about Joe. Jim, obviously you've spent a lot of time with him, so maybe we'll start with you on this one, but just what you think of when you think of Joe Alessi.
I mean, there's one thing I will never ever forget, and that's the kindness he showed me when, like I said before, with my background, my family didn't have resources. And when I was in high school in particular, and he knew that and he understood that, and he said, yeah, I still want to work with you anyway. And so I went to his house for a lesson. I tried to pay him. He said, no. He said, no, I just want to do this. And so I went to the next lesson. I tried to pay him. He said, if you try to pay me again, you will not walk in this door anymore, ever. I said, okay, thank you, Mr. Alessi. Thank you. And just this generosity of giving up Saturday mornings and that kind of time with me, I will never forget that. That will always be, and he will always have a very, very special place for me for that very personal connection that he was very magnanimous about. It was wonderful.
That's a great story. Steve?
Well, I can't say enough great things about Joe. He emerged in school. You know, when I was trying to become a better trombone player, he emerged at the exact right time for me. All of my teachers were really terrific for me. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Joe Dixon, Keith Brown, and I certainly wouldn't be here because of without Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I arrived at Juilliard and started studying with him, he put 110% into his students, and I really appreciated that. I mean, he's a firecracker in his lessons, in our lessons, in everyone's lessons, and I really loved the energy that he brought in these lessons. And sometimes he was hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but you know what? That's what I needed at the time, and so I don't have a one particular memory. I look back on my days at Juilliard and studying with Joe with just great admiration for what he's done. And it's getting to the point now where it's very, I mean, if you're going to be a professional classical trombone player, you're going to end up working with him,
Mm-hmm.
because he's so good at diagnosing issues so quick.
Mm-hmm.
Been to 3 of his Alessi seminars, and you know, I'm constantly learning from the guy. I saw the interview that you did with him, and there were things that it's a gold mine of things that you can learn from him. So yes, so that's all I have to say about Joe.
Yeah, cool stuff.
Yeah.
I can't say I have the same connection, unfortunately. I didn't get to go to Juilliard, unfortunately, but I did take lessons often. When I was in Chicago, I finished my master's, and I didn't know what to do, so I started freelancing and taking as many lessons as I could afford. And one of the people that helped me was Mark Fisher, and I said, I think I need to go to Juilliard, and he said, why? And I said, it just seems like all the people that have success I admire are coming out of Juilliard, and I just have this small window of opportunity before it's practically irrelevant for me to go, just because of age or time of life. And Mark said, you know, it costs a lot of money to live in New York and to move. Why don't you just fly to New York as often as you can and get lessons. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. So that's what I did for 2 years. And I got lessons whenever I could with Joe. And that was at a time in my life when I really needed Joe, because the pervasive way to play in Chicago is to focus on breath and buzz. But I had just changed my embouchure, and there were some things that he was able to address insofar as the structure of my embouchure to make sure that it was intact and I could continue on. With the two together, I was able to continue my career as well or better than if I'd gone to Juilliard. And the fact that he made himself available was great, but the best thing about it was I knew that I needed to get my butt kicked. Now, there's not a shortage of people that want to give you a hard lesson. But the truth of the matter is, if you go to somebody and you get your butt kicked in such a way that it eviscerates your confidence, it can be very damaging, in fact. And I've had a couple of lessons where I just am so embarrassed that there's all these details I'm not able to take care of. I just wanted to hide under the chair for the remainder of the lesson period. But with Joe, he always seemed to know exactly what issues not to let go of. So this is really important. If you don't focus on it, you're not going to find the success you deserve. And I remember he was being particularly rough with me in one lesson. I was loving it. And then he stopped short because my wife actually came to many of my lessons. She would be like, okay, let's go to New York. And so we would go to New York and I'd see Joe, and then, we'd have a dinner out, and then we'd go home. And so she's sitting there and she's in the background, and Joe just finished no, you have got to fix this, and then he stopped and he realized, oh yeah, Andrea's in here, and then he righted himself. He's don't think I'm gonna go easy on you just because your wife's in here. I was like, no, that's okay, Joe. That's why I'm here. But so the fact of the matter is that I'm sure we have the skills with all of our students to just give them a laundry list of things that are wrong with their playing. But to give them a laundry list that has 3, maybe 4 elements that are actually within their ability to fix and will make the most difference, so that they leave with a sense of progress, and that success is available just via hard work. That's what I got from Joe, and that's exactly what I needed.
That's well said, actually.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It always struck me, clearly he's turned out, all 3 of you, great orchestral players, and his dedication to his students has always been striking to me. He's just so committed to giving his students everything he can give them. It's great. Just to change gears a little bit, I've heard it said that the 3 most solvent and well-endowed orchestras in the United States are Boston Symphony Orchestra, Los Angeles Philharmonic, and the San Francisco Symphony. Whether that's completely accurate or not, I don't know. But it's clear that the BSO is on solid footing, and that your guys' positions are in great shape. We've seen it a lot over the last few years in terms of labor negotiations, bankruptcy, strikes, and whatnot. It's been a tumultuous time for the American symphony orchestras, particularly orchestras like Philadelphia, Detroit. We're seeing it in Minnesota, Atlanta, Syracuse, and a host of others. I was wondering if you could just share your thoughts and your hopes and maybe your fears as well about kind of where we're headed with the state of the American Symphony Orchestra at this point.
Let's just start this one.
I actually have some things to say about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that it's accurate that these 3 orchestras are on very solid footing. And one of the main reasons that, and actually some similarities between the other orchestras that you indicated. For the BSO, we own our venue, both summer and winter. And in fact, we don't have to do runouts for pops, although we do have a tremendous following with the Boston Pops Esplanade Orchestra, which is actually beginning a tour as we speak to the southeast. A great following, and in fact, I think that the leaders of the management actually have done a really good job of creating and maintaining a brand name and identity. Everybody knows the Boston Pops. And it's continuing on. I don't think it's extraordinary to think that there would be some economic restructuring just because of the fallout of what's happened in the U.S. economy over the last 10 years. But that said, the deeper concern that I have is actually where cultural education is in the U.S. I think in larger cities like we're located in, there's a tremendous cultural appetite for the arts. And that isn't just with music, that's in fact with graphic art and film. We live in a great town of education. There is, at any given moment, anywhere from 250,000 to 300,000 students in Boston alone. And that is a huge population of people that desire and cultivate things that are artistically fresh. They want these things close to them, they have an appetite for them, and there's a lot of support for what we do here in Boston, and that's a wonderful thing to be a part of. I look out in the audience and I see a lot of young people. Some of them are students, of course, but music students, I should say. But there's also outreach to places where you wouldn't see, students that you would see at Berkeley or NEC. There's like MIT, there's Harvard students where people have other focuses for their study. All that said, my concern is that of course, being the son of music educators, I feel like that's the big problem in the U.S. has more to do with how we're educating our children and what they think of music in general. For example, Dominic Sparrows, our trumpet teacher at IU, and he said one time, every culture is actually in danger, especially with the isolated ones like the U.S. And actually, he was talking about Australia at one point. He said people grow up wondering why. I mean, they think that protecting institutions like museums and symphony orchestras are important, but they don't understand why. And for example, in Europe, where the tradition of the symphony was founded, people are exposed to and understand that cultural identity is a significant thing to be protected and celebrated, that history, to understand why it's important. Not just that it's important because that's what you do when you're affluent or educated. It's actually important because it's part of your heritage. It's actually important to understand where these things came from and why other people think that they're significant. And I feel like that's the biggest thing that we have to protect is actually cultural education, that we don't produce successive generations of cultural misfits, people that don't understand the context of why art and culture are significant things to protect and understand in their lifestyle.
Well said.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see some institutions having some of the issues that they're having right now. I went through it too in St. Louis in 2005, and to be on work stoppage for 6 to 8 weeks was horrifying. And the emotional toll that it took, especially considering that my wife is also in management, and we would come home and she'd tell me, well, here's what we talked about in our meeting. Guess what? You guys don't have health insurance. And I'd come home from my meeting going, yeah, we have health insurance. You guys wouldn't do that, would you? And comparing notes and going, oh no, this is going to be really interesting. And that was absolutely horrifying. And to see that some of the orchestras who, you can name a few pretty easily, who are going through this right now, especially Minnesota, who's still on their work stoppage, is particularly horrifying to me. And my heart goes out to them. However, there is hope. St. Louis rebounded from this, and they got really creative. They got really creative with how they marketed their concerts. Their programming became more creative, and they found connections with the public, and I think they're doing okay. That's the word. So they're doing just fine, and the one thing I can say is just there is hope, but we have to be creative, and the education not only has to happen with the younger generation, the kids, to get them to love music, and it's great. it's another extension of who we are, and a way to be creative in ways other than just with crayons, and just lots of different ways, but also creative in how at the managerial level, to be creative, to get to bring new audiences in, and it's not just classical music. I mean, one of the things that the St. Louis Symphony did is they started playing more pops like literature. They'd have a John Williams night. They'd have a Star Wars night. Hey, if you like the Imperial March, you might want to come to the Planets by Holst in a couple weeks. And so that would be a way to kind of, hey, come check us out. It's a really nice time. So that's what I say about that.
Yeah. That must have been an interesting dynamic in your household. Between
Yeah. We had a red line in the house. You cannot cross. No, but we came out of that just fine, and we knew it would be fine. But yeah, it wasn't easy. But it's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I'm really feeling for those orchestras who are having trouble right now. But I know that there's hope out there, and I think I'm just very hopeful that things will turn out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think of the history of basically how orchestras get started, philanthropists, people with the means, people with certain means, financial means, understand that it's important for art to progress, for music to progress. And so they come together and they form a Philharmonic Symphony Society of New York and say, oh, gee, it's really important for New York to have an orchestra. And that's how it all gets started. And then eventually, as it gets bigger, they decide they can't run it themselves. They hire a management. The musicians get better. But it's because with the underlying understanding that music and art are important. And to getting at what Toby was getting at, when we look at the state of education nowadays, is math important? Yes, it is. And are good language skills and verbal skills important? Yes, they are. And is science important? Yes, it is. But so are sports. And not necessarily professional sports. All sports, they're good. They promote teamwork. They have their place in society. And people who are really into athletics would support that. Music is very much the same way. It is really, really important that as part of the culture that we be able to play. Children play and adults play to a certain extent. We have recreation, and it's really important for us to keep that in mind when we go about with educational institutions. And what we're finding more and more is in public education, as we pull away from those things and focus on certain individual aspects of a child's education, you start to ignore other aspects of their growth. It becomes difficult in colleges because colleges want to see well-rounded people. So, yeah, good SAT scores, and you have to be involved in all these different activities, and yet we're not providing a means within the educational system necessarily to allow that to happen because we're focusing exclusively on certain aspects, whether it be standardized tests exclusively or just those particular individual subjects. We need to educate the entire person in all aspects. When we do that, you start to see that all of culture and preserving culture, that's how you preserve it, is you educate the youth that, hey, this is important. This is part of who you are. It's part of the American culture. It's part of the greater world culture. We have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. All three of you, interesting vantage points to answer that question. All three really good thoughts.